Radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Well. Here we go. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. I'm lining up my crystals here, everybody. I got to make sure that they're perfectly in line and in place. Otherwise, I can't start the show. Fade to Black. Today is Monday, June 2nd, 2025. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Here we go, kicking off a brand new week here of Fade to Black. I just got back from Palm Springs, out there at Contact in the Desert. And here we are on Monday. Tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein is with us. We're going to be talking about tonight, cold fusion. Does it explain everything? It just might. That is tonight's show. Tomorrow night, Hugh Newman is back with us. We're going to be talking about Gobekli and Karahan Tepe tomorrow night on the show. Wednesday night, Trey Hudson back with us. We're going to be talking about the Meadow and his research out there and the high strangeness that is going on. Thursday night, Dale Graff is with us. We're going to be talking about the psi field and precog dreams. All right. Now, I do have two major events coming up. I'm headed to Peru in a couple of weeks, and that'll be with Brian Forrester, June 17th through the 27th. I come back from that for the Psi Games, August 1st through the 3rd, 2025 in Charlottesville, Virginia. Excited about that because I get to be a game show host. And now I wanted to say a couple of things. I just got back from Contact in the Desert. An amazing time out there. I posted pictures as I went through the weekend, and I think I live streamed too as well. And great fun out there. Captain Ron and the team put on an amazing event. It was a lot of fun hanging out with the Fadernauts and everybody that was out there. A couple of things I wanted to just note before I bring Simeon on. People pay attention to this show. They do. And one of the things that happened constantly as I talked to people was they said, "Can we see your tattoos?" Yeah, that's okay. How cool is that? I mean, it's just, we could talk about UFOs and science and physics and everything that we talk about in this show. That's great. But people are paying attention when they ask me that. And it was pretty cool. Anyway, so I got back from Palm Springs, and they were testing out here the new B-21 stealth bomber, and heavy testing. And I was able to just look up in the sky or drive around, and there it was. And normally I don't talk about this stuff on the air. I'll talk about it later, but never when it happens in real time. But the friggin' Air Force is posting pictures online, and it was them doing it. So I guess it's okay to mention the B-21, man, just up there flying around all weekend this weekend. And I thought I heard it again today. I rushed outside and didn't see it. I was probably on the wrong side of the house, but that part doesn't matter. It's pretty cool to see that going on. Pretty exciting weekend. And Jonathan was asking in the chat, what did I do this weekend? And I wanted to put that in the chat too as well. I'm just nervous about disclosing these things when you're right next to Skunk Works and you see this stuff every day. I'm scared to talk about it. I just don't want the men in black showing up going, no. All right. But they posted pictures, so I'm going to mention it. Pretty exciting to see that going on. I love technology, which is what tonight's show is all about. Dr. Simeon Hein is back with us. And tonight we're going to talk about his research into cold fusion. All right. Yes, it's the science, but it's a combination of the science and the paranormal. And that's what he does. And his research into cold fusion may explain a wide range of mysterious phenomena, from Bigfoot and cryptids to ghost sightings, orbs, ball lightning, and even, are you ready? Animal mutilations. We're going to do all of that and much more. We've got all of his links below, and I'm excited to have him back. He's right there, Dr. Simeon Hein.
Hey,
Simeon, how are you, my brother?
Hey, Jimmy. Thanks for having me on tonight.
Man, it's always, you know why I enjoy having you on. Now, I enjoy every guest. I don't want to say that, it's like you have 3 pets. You love them all equally, right? Okay. So, but anyway, with you, I can freely just let the conversation go and talk about all the things that I'm interested in. And that's always a great conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. That's the way good conversations are, right? They flow. They have a natural flow, and they just go where they're going to go, and it all makes sense in the end, you hope. So
you're one of those that I would love to have over for dinner. You know what I mean? And I always have, I think it was, who was that? Andy Warhol. I think Andy Warhol said 8 dinner guests is the perfect dinner because of the conversations you can have. You don't want to have too many. You don't want to have too little, but 8 means great conversation. And that's what I love about having dinners at my house, is the right mix of people, the right size, and then so you can enjoy conversation into the early hours of the morning.
I'm imagining what that conversation would be like right now. I can just see what we're talking about. So
yeah,
it would be good. It would be good.
Yeah. I mean, the food is always great, right? And the personalities are there, and it's freedom of thought, freedom of mind, and just wind it up and let it go, and you would be great.
We'll have to we're going to do this sometime. We're going to do
we definitely, and then maybe a little guitar, play a little guitar.
I think so.
Guitar. I'm going to tell everybody before we get started here tonight. So Simeon and I were chatting a little bit ago, and I'm sure that the people would think, oh yeah, okay, so they were talking about physics and they were talking about Bigfoot and UFO. No, we talked music. Yeah, we talked guitars, the whole all the way to the bloody end. That was great. Yes, everybody, he just whipped out an ovation. When I was a kid, see how easy it is to get sucked into guitars. When I was a kid, this was in the 70s when ovations first came out, and up to that point, technology started to grab hold in everything, in industry and everything else. And ovation was the first like high-tech guitar, alternative constructions and ideas that were different from the traditions that have gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years in instrument making. And ovation was the first, and they were not cheap when they came out, and they're still not. The ovation applause, you remember that one?
Yeah.
The budget one,
Mhm.
right? So you can get an applause for a couple $100. But the other ones, everybody wanted those when we were growing up. I never got my hands on one, but you have one right there. Such a cool guitar. How's it play?
It's excellent. I love the sound of it, and sometimes I even prefer it, over a more expensive guitar, just because, well, it's got the hybrid construction. So it's, tuning, it's going to keep staying tuned a little better as you go to the gig. That's always an issue before you perform with an acoustic guitar. It could take like 20 minutes of tuning before you go on stage to get it right. This is a little better because of I think it's a graphite composite. Maybe it's made of UFO technology. Who knows?
I think so. Same thing that the stealth fighter is coated with.
Yes. Yeah.
It you feel more confident with that guitar. You can bang it around just a little bit. You don't want to, drop it down some stairs, but you don't have to be as gentle like you would with a Martin D28
No,
or something.
and Jimmy, Ovation, if I remember this correctly, they were one of the first companies to build electronics into an acoustic instrument, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right. And
Plug it
then
right in. Yeah.
like with the applause had an aluminum neck, and the frets and the neck were one piece. Yeah. Did you know that?
Yeah.
It didn't have frets installed. It was a one piece aluminum neck, and the frets were part of the guitar. Very high tech, very, So anyway, see, we could just talk guitars all night long. I just love doing it. Do you think? Okay. Do you think we're going to get into cold fusion in a second? Do you think ET listens to music?
They listen to I would imagine they listen to their own type of music.
They have to, right?
I would think so. Because, music is physics, ultimately. These are not separate subjects. And I'm just thinking about that very famous physicist from 200 years ago, Kolodny, Ernst Friedrich Florence Kolodny, considered the father of acoustics. He created the idea of cymatics. He went around Europe with his violin, and he played that metal plate with the sand on top. I'm sure people, our viewers are familiar in the cymatics idea, where you get these very coherent looking wave patterns from different notes. And that this is not just something that's sort of an esoteric piece of knowledge, that became the basis of the quantum wave function. When Schrodinger created the mathematics behind the Schrodinger wave function, it was based on Kolodny's waveforms. Back then, at Kolodny's time, it was simpler. It didn't have, the idea of multiple electrons around a particle. It was just sort of one type of waveform. But the mathematics was worked out then, and quantum mechanics took that. So, in a way, music is one of the bases of quantum mechanics. If you go
for
back.
Sure.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's take it one step further. String theory. String theory would not happen if it weren't for the violin and the guitar. Do you understand the idea?
Is that the history of it? That the people?
No, that's my history of it.
Your history. Okay.
But when you, especially like Brian Greene, but any physicist that tries to explain in layman's terms what string theory is, they go right there. It's like the string of a guitar that vibrates at a certain frequency, and that will dictate and determine. Okay, so that's the only way to visualize it, and it's called string theory, strings that vibrate. And so, I think that is very musically oriented.
Jimmy, let me make a prediction right now. Okay,
go.
When first contact happens, whenever it is in 2027 or whatever year it's coming towards us, where these craft become apparent to us, the occupants, the ETs or interdimensionals, whoever's in these vehicles or however they show up, I have a feeling that people are going to hear a type of music with its sounds that they haven't heard before. So I think your idea is actually going to be, we'll see. We'll all see in a number of years, whenever this happens, if this is true, there's going to be sounds associated with it that we've never really quite experienced before.
With contactees and experiencers, when they describe the ships and what they see and so forth, I always ask them about a couple of things, because you never really hear. Is there artwork hanging on the walls? Is there an artistic, aesthetic value to the interior of the ship? And is there any music playing? How do you spend that much time on a ship void of everything? It doesn't make sense, because ET would have to have evolved in the same ways that we did. They went through theater, comedy, poetry, writing, right? The media arts and music. They would have experienced all of that in their own evolution. That's my take. And I just don't think I'm wrong.
Yeah, in their own way, but it may have evolved into something that we don't directly experience the way they do when we're on their ship. It may be something they're perceiving that we're not, our perceptual abilities are not quite tuned to the way theirs are. So there
And
might be something.
yeah,
We don't
and then
know.
there's
Good question. This is actually a very interesting discussion that I think we'll actually, in our lifetimes, I think all of us are actually going to see what's the deal here with this.
I totally agree with that. I wouldn't be surprised if ET gets off their ship wearing a t-shirt that says Hagar or David Lee Roth, right? With a question mark. I wouldn't be surprised. A Van Halen t-shirt, a
Perennial
Pantera.
debate. Yes.
Yeah. I would not. It's just that if they've been studying us, and they have been, right? And they know our likes, our dislikes. They know all of our languages. They know what makes us tick. They know what we're scared of and what fear, what makes us happy. And they would have been exposed to Paganini and Vivaldi and Bach and Beethoven and Led Zeppelin. I just, it has to be that way. It just cannot be another way.
No, and this is another discussion for another day, but there are people that have continually made a connection between rock and roll and UFO contact. Many references in all our favorite rock songs to visitors. I think even John Lennon wrote one after one of his experiences where he saw a disc with Yoko in Manhattan, sort of off their balcony. And this seems to be a recurrent theme in a lot of rock and roll music, which, most of us, I would imagine, listening here grew up with. And there's always been this theory, Jimmy, that this was inspired by extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, as a way to get us to evolve. Because there's nothing like rock and roll that can charge you up like that can change your mood.
Yeah, you're right. And
it's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah. It is. And I think that, no, I just said, I think, it is my take that consciousness, which is becoming more and more of the conversation, both in science and in our community, but, and the connectedness of everything with musicians and creative types, their mind is open. And they understand or are able to understand and see things and consider things differently than people that don't have an open mind. And so when you look at something like, I can just go down the list, Styx, Come Sail Away, right? Inca Roads by Frank Zappa, Love Walks In by Van Halen. These are songs, The Sky is a Neighborhood by the Foo Fighters. These are songs about ET contact. There's no guessing what these songs are about. That's exactly what I remember. Eddie said, yeah, Love Walks In, man. Yeah, that's a song about alien contact. It's not a love song. People think it's a love song. Listen to the words. Some kind of alien comes walking in. It's so, yeah. And I think consciousness is the key to all of this, and ET understands that.
Right, and certainly the eras of rock and roll, 50s, 60s, 70s, beyond, it changed people's mindset in a huge way. It got us together in concerts, and not in the way that previous music made us feel like we had to conform and wear a suit, and just sit there with our hands in our laps and just be quiet. It got you participating. So there was something very evolutionary about, modern rock music in the last, 70 years or so. And so I would not be surprised if this had some connection to ET, UFO, the songs, and what we'll see in history is how it helped us evolve to have a broader mindset that could even accept something like this. So.
And, okay, now let's pull this into the science side, and then we'll segue into cold fusion. You brought up cymatics, which I think is crucial. But if everything is frequency based, which it is, obviously, but if it is, And then you have the rhythmic patterns of something basic like a drum beat that allows the syncopation of nature back into your own body and brain waves, that everything is just fundamentally connected and you can eventually get on that same frequency and wavelength.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It brings us together. It brings us a feeling of being part of something at the same time and with a large group, and the themes, there's these sort of values and ethics of rock and roll. It was Geddy Lee, remember he said, in looking at your ethics, he said, never do something that would have violated your ethics that you had as an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
So it's just like a whole paradigm, and it not only changed a whole generation. I mean, I think it kind of led to new ideas and questioning authority, right? And you could go thousands of years without questioning authority. Just look at societies around us, even today, where you just believe whatever is being told by the higher ups. So it really led to this. It's kind of like a pre-disclosure mindset, in my view. Rock and roll music, it leads you to start questioning things and feel a sense of energy and confidence that things could be different than they were in the past, but there's something it's not something to be afraid of. It has its own coherency, right? It keeps moving. And anyway, it's a fascinating topic.
So you're an anarchist physicist? Is that what you're saying?
No,
that's kind of what you're describing. Yeah. I get it. You got to burn down the old to get to the new.
Well, I'm not the only one who said that. You look at all these quantum fathers and mothers of quantum mechanics said the same thing, that it just only moves forward, one funeral at a time. Science, because people don't want to change their ideas. And we're all part of this too. We even have ideas. I'm sure if you start getting in discussions with people and they challenge you, you can have this knee-jerk reaction that you're right. But when you really look at it, it's very easy to fall into a set mind, a mind framework where you stop questioning the reality beyond what you learned in school. And that's what we're all being confronted with right now. What's coming at us right now from multiple directions, whether it's the science, the topic of tonight, cold fusion, Leonard type topics, UFOs, ETs, or you can update them, call them UAP now, if that's a little safer. I mean, whether people realize it or not, people who are listening and watching this show right now, whether they realize it or not, are on the vanguard of this change, because you have been inoculating them every single night you do this show to this kind of fear of change. They're them, that people who are a part of the show love it and they crave it. They have the curiosity. Just look at the guests you mentioned at the beginning, all people that I know and respect and love to converse with. But it is coming at us at multiple angles. I don't see any other way out of it, whether it's from out there or from the inside. And there is going to be quite a big paradigm shift. It's been so long in the making. I think at least 50 years. It's like the water behind the dam of evidence building up, and the system really didn't want to adjust to it. I think we'd all agree this sort of disclosure that we talk about has been a little slower than we thought it might have been. I think some of us, even back in the 90s, thought it's just like next year, the government's going to come out.
Next week.
And they're going to come out and just tell us there's going to be a press conference, and President Clinton's just going to hold a press conference and it's all going to be over. And here we are, like, 20, 30 years later, and we're still but that just means when it's going to happen, it's like an earthquake. I mean, you can hold back the tectonic plate movements, but when they finally start to move, right, it's a lot more movement.
I can't remember the physicist who said this. I'll have to think about it. I read it in a book. Got to think about it. Anyway, who said, if you want to be a scientist, and specifically a physicist, and beyond that, a theoretical physicist, you have to have extremely thick skin, because whatever you do today will be wrong tomorrow. Eventually, somebody's going to come along and prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And you can't let that deter you. You've got to stay
Right.
the course. But that is what science is nothing but a string of corrections.
That's right.
It's
That's
like
right.
no truer words have been spoken, have they?
No, that is exactly right. That's what people often don't realize about science is every idea in the long run gets overturned. It's what you want to happen. You want to simplify it and get some sort of unification in your sense of how reality works. So it means that the more complex ideas give way to simpler ideas. And anyone who's been part of those older ideas, there's this tendency to cling to these ideas and hold on to them and defend them, but everything ultimately gets overturned. Even what we're saying tonight, as much as it makes sense to us, it's the best we can do with the information that's been available to us over the past decades and all the books we've read about history. It's our best sense of what's going on. But I'm sure someone will come along in 100 years or even less and show even a simpler way of describing what we're talking about. And that's how the process works. It's really anarchic in a lot of ways and inherently revolutionary, even though it seems to move at this glacial pace, believe me.
And it's not
slow,
it's right. And the crazy part is it's not so glacial. If we go back to the turn of the century, when there were still scientists and physicists out there arguing about the existence of the atom, right? Like, and so the idea of quantum mechanics and quantum theory and quantum physics, especially back then when they couldn't see any of this was all math and theoretical, right? And even to this day, visually we see very little of it. Everything is algorithms and its equations and theoretical. But the point is, if we go back to the turn of the century and the idea of fusion and how atoms and elements work for the existence of stars and how that happens, that was all theory. And how far and how fast we have come in the last 100 years between 1925 and now. You go back, Schrodinger, Niels Bohr, right? Those gatherings in Copenhagen, and these great the conversations that they were having back then, Simeon, which were so exciting, was the craziest science fiction of all time. Right. But that was the only way to work through it. And look where we are just 100 years later, one lifetime.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
crazy.
100 years ago, the idea of the atom, as you're pointing out, no one had actually seen an atom. It was just hypothesized to exist. The technology didn't exist for a couple more decades with electron microscopes and things to see at that level. So it was all theoretical, but the idea was that it was like planets circling a sun. That's the Bohr atom. That's what we started with. And look how far we've come to this idea of this probabilistic cloud that does this quantum jumping between energy levels, the electrons and so forth. By the time the only model they could conceive is, well, it's like, moon circling around the Earth. And that's, the electrons going around the nucleus. And of course, there was a problem with that, because what would keep them from eventually falling into the center of that planet? What would keep them in orbit? So even at the time, they knew it didn't quite make sense. In other words, it would exhaust all its energy and just stop. But that's not what happens. So eventually they realized that these electrons just jump around between shells, and that they also have a wave-like description where they're really not anywhere at any one time. They could be there until you make the measurement. You don't know where they are. And that's where this all began to change, is the realization that what looks like it's really solid actually has a cymatic wave description, just like a cymatic pattern of sand on a metal plate, that it's a waveform. And that describes it as accurately as the idea that it's actually something solid, because there's more space in this than there actually is stuff. The space is like proportionally, as far apart as stars in the sky. It's mostly empty space described by this wave function, which is very challenging for our minds to understand, isn't it? But that's what it seems to show. So
And here I'll
that's
throw
where
one
conscious-
last
Yeah.
I'll throw one last thing in there, because the double slit, I mean, just right there, you can and it's so elegantly illustrated, right? You can see it, right? But people don't get it. And it's way out. It's way out. What do you mean a particle can be a what and a what at the same time, depending on what? Right? And watching them scatter and line up, it doesn't make sense to anybody how this can possibly happen. But then at the same time, it was suggested that you could change the state of something by observing it. Right. And it's just like, wait a minute. And now, but yet a physicist won't believe in ghosts. Right. It doesn't make, it's just like,
precisely.
It doesn't make any sense. That is the craziest science fiction ever.
Jimmy, that's exactly right. This is what I'm really glad you brought that up, because this is what I always wonder. We're being told that matter is both simultaneously a particle and a wave, and that our measuring it actually affects the system itself. And it actually doesn't exist until, this is what quantum mechanics actually tells us. It doesn't exist until you take the measurement. And yet, it's hard to believe in ghosts. What's more ghostly than something that's not there till you measure it? It's not really there.
I would even take it another step further and say, what's the difference?
What is the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference? It's crazy to me. And so today, where we can have conversations with science that are trying their best to convince and have the world understand about the multiverse, extra dimensions, 11 dimensions, parallel worlds, qubits, quantum computing, entanglement, right? That is the craziest wackadoodle woo-woo science fiction there is, but yet this is science fact for the world of science. And they are trying to, the Marvel universe isn't that wackadoodle, right?
No, it's not that wackadoodle. And again, with the strangest ideas that modern physics tells us exist, even going as far as parallel realities and multiverses, which have existed ever since Hugh Everett III did his thesis under John Wheeler at Princeton, right? Back in the 50s. The idea of multiverses, parallel realities that are in the same space we're in, but you can't always see them. Somehow that's labeled paranormal or supernatural, but if it happens at a microscopic level, it's just called quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
That's what doesn't add up here. That's our challenge to science. If you guys are so smart, why is your really weird quantum world just obvious, but then we have other phenomena that regular people experience all the time, all over the world for thousands of years, and you're labeling as supernatural? Why isn't it just natural or normal? It's a type of labeling designed to make something marginalized. In my view, as a sociologist, it's deliberately marginalizing people's experience because it doesn't quite fit the social power structures that be. Something like that is going on here. Because it's no stranger. The stuff we talk about on this show, other shows, the topics all of us here enjoy talking to people's experiences about, which I get to do a lot. There's nothing stranger about that than telling me that a particle is in a superposition, like we're told in quantum computers, which we know all the major, tech companies are working on, and governments and so forth, to have these super powerful quantum computers that can break cryptographic keys and so forth. The particle is both a 1 and a 0 simultaneously, but somehow ghosts are weird. Seriously? How do you, what's the logic there?
And so one last thing, and we got to get into cold fusion.
Yeah.
We have to. This is going to be a great conversation. But No, well, we can just do whatever, man. You're the guest. It's my show. Is this forever? We have accepted, I'm going to say dogma, about Einstein's general and special. Let's apply it to both. And the speed of light and mass and energy. Okay. All right. That nothing can exceed the speed of light for a multitude of reasons, but that's the law, right? That's it. That's the accepted, right? That's it. Except entanglement. It's like, wait a minute. You're saying that two particles can affect each other no matter the distance or obstacles in between instantly, not faster than the speed of light, at the speed of now. Now that goes against the grain of everything, but that is where they are today. But telepathy doesn't exist, right? Or anything else that could operate in the same principles don't exist. But you have to believe in entanglement, and I would argue that it's the same thing.
No, exactly right, Jimmy. This is what I wonder about every day: is how did our science go in this direction to label telepathy as something that seems, strange or weird or unbelievable, or there's no evidence for it, despite, the 20 years of the government RV program. You're going to talk to Dale Graff. He knows all about this as one of the program directors for the RV program for a while. But yeah, it's actually, to me, not scientific. As someone who's subscribed to this magazine for 30 years and read every issue, why are the topics that are chosen to be in this magazine put out by the American Association of the Advancement of Science, why don't we find the topics that we talk about on this show in this magazine? That is a big question. Ever since, we would say, post-World War II, these topics have been really pushed off to the margins. Very little funding, lots of funding for other types of science, but not for these types of phenomena that actually affect people every day. And people have experiences of it. They know it's real because they've either talked to people who've experienced it, family members, they've had an experience, precognition, something that doesn't add up with that linear mechanistic model that we were taught is how it works in high school and college, right? They have an experience of this sort of instantaneous communication, like you're suggesting. Why isn't that taken? What is the threat to our system for taking that seriously? Why isn't it taken seriously? And it seems something to ridicule, attack. It's a really good question. I don't have all the answers. I'm sure everyone listening right now has their own view on this, but that's really what concerns me a lot of the time, including the cold fusion topic that we're about to talk to. Same sorts of irrational attacks, literally on the people themselves, not just the ideas. Why is that okay? But somehow with other types of science, superposition, quantum entanglement, that's not considered any stranger. I think you're making a good point here, Jimmy. There's a kind of
okay. So this is my take on that thought. Is that they've been chasing the theory of everything. Okay. All right. I think that the theory of everything is what they're afraid of. And I think it's consciousness. I think it's consciousness and entanglement eventually unwrap into the fundamental things that drive the universe. Yeah. And that they don't want to go there. They just don't.
So there was this guy, Dr. Vannevar Bush.
Yep.
Back in the 50s. He is alleged to have been on the MJ12 group, right? And yet he wrote a book about the dangers of federally funded science. Believe it or not, destroying individual initiative, curiosity, and creativity. This is the same Dr. Vannevar Bush. On one hand, we see him as sort of representing this sort of evil deep state.
Cabal.
Yes,
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
MJ12 group covering up the reality of extraterrestrial visitation, which might be true. At the same time, he writes this book about the dangers of centralized science. And I think that is what we're dealing with. We've had decades and decades of centralized, federally funded science. A lot of it helps us every day, with weather predictions and studies of the ocean and the climate and the atmosphere and, protections from, toxic chemicals and so forth. That's what we all love, benefit from that. But the other side of it is to attack and marginalize scientific research traditions that don't fit into that centralized model. And for decade after decade, pushing them away, like the UFO topic, like psi research, parapsychology. And it is seen now by the mainstream as something, as you were saying a few moments ago, something, it's something that you can legitimately make fun of and ridicule. And believe me, as someone who's been involved with remote viewing, I've had contact with newscasters and news crews that came to study what we were doing, but at the end they told us they had come to debunk what we were doing. I won't mention the network. It seemed like just an experiment, but underneath there was this agenda to debunk it. Why not try to see if it's actually real? Well, you're putting the same amount of energy
bigger story. The bigger story to them is the debunking, not the advancement of science.
Yeah. And that's where we are now. And that's why we're so far behind in understanding UFOs, UFO technology, and consciousness, is we've had this multi-decade war against these types of science. And maybe it's partly deliberate because, as we're told, it's highly classified. So there's sort of a couple things going on here. The people that know about it want to publicly debunk it so the rest of us don't figure out how it's working, because they want to enjoy the benefits without, our participation, these special access programs. And this is, we've seen Congress talking about this in these hearings recently, just 2 weeks ago, right?
Yep.
With Eric Davis and some of the other folks that have been involved with this. Yeah. So it's really, when I have conversations with the scientists who've been involved with ATIP and OSAP, and people, you can meet them at conferences and so forth. You just came back from one. Sometimes those folks are there. You can talk to them. They're happy to talk to you off the record. What they will tell you is it's damaged American science, this attitude that you and I are talking about right now of ridiculing all of this and compartmentalizing it on the other side, so that we're farther behind than we should be at this point, because we don't have honest public discussions, including the cold fusion topic. It's just seen as okay in magazines like this. And I write them letters sometimes when I see their attitudes towards these topics, is that they're not looking at it scientifically. They're looking to make ad hominem person attacking the people, not the actual evidence, because it seems to threaten their grant structure and their funding mechanism. So it's like a turf war. But I am happy to say the data is catching up quite quickly to this older structure of science. And it was Bob John from the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. Remember Pear Labs that did all that research in micro PK? They had, for 20 years, people come in and focus on ones or zeros to affect the random number generators. Produced a lot of good evidence. I've talked to the people that worked in that program. And he once said, if science isn't going to engage this after 20 years of producing hundreds of thousands of tests and trials with good outcomes that show a clear effect of any person, average person, being able to affect a random number generator just by thinking 1 or 0, and the effect is stronger, by the way, in paired couples. He said, if they're not going to engage it, they just need to eventually get out of the way and let us, it's like the Bob Dylan song, if you're not going to help, then just move out of the way, which was one of those songs. Eventually the data builds up so much and it becomes technology and science, like we're seeing happening in quantum computing, that they're going to be irrelevant because these technologies and this type of science, and I'm convinced this type of contact with extraterrestrials or whoever they are, this is going to happen. And it's going to make them look pretty archaic very quickly, in my view.
What's the difference between fusion and cold fusion?
So the fusion is something we're all familiar with just by the way the sun works. We're familiar with hot fusion from how we're told stars work at very high temperatures, fusing hydrogen into helium, overcoming this Coulomb barrier that we're told is the reason fusion doesn't happen at lower temperatures. It's literally what Isaac Newton studied, alchemy. It's elements transmuting into other elements. And you remember for hundreds of years, scientists, Newton and others, were always looking how to turn lead into gold. That is fusion in essence. And
CERN did this last week. Yeah, pretty crazy.
We've had these. So this is what the deal here is with fusion is it does appear this is how nature works. Nature is using fusion all of the time at very high temperatures, like we see out in the cosmos, but also at low temperatures in nature all around us, in geology, in tornadoes, in volcanoes, and many other processes that nature just creates on its own without us.
Okay,
so at low temperatures, the same sort of fusion process via another we would say electromagnetic mechanism at very small scales. And this is what let
me jump in. For everybody out there, just let me explain, clean up what Simeon just so elegantly put together. Our sun uses its mass and gravity to compress its core of, right now it is hydrogen. It has a hydrogen core surrounded by a helium shell, and that compression down, the heat generated, right now it's about 10 million degrees, that the fusion process occurs, hydrogen is changed, and then it eventually makes its way out of the sun and turns into heat, and then eventually reaches us here. The sun is going to go through 3 different stages of this process. Eventually, helium's going to overtake the core, and because helium is a heavier element than hydrogen, and that's another process that'll be at 100 million degrees gravity, and our sun is going to do some crazy shit, and we will not be living here when that occurs. It's going to be a crazy process, but that is that. And then, so to change that process at lower temperatures, that's the key to everything.
That is the key to everything. Because
it's the key to everything.
Jimmy, the fusion process that we see in the sun and these very expensive, very sophisticated, complex man-made experiments like CERN, like ITER, and other hot fusion lab experiments that are very expensive and to this date have really never worked for more than trillionths of a second, they produce excess heat, excess energy. More energy comes out than you put in. So the idea has always been, if we can harness this or tap into this, not only can we have nucleonic transmutation of elements, we can tap into the same type of energy that we get from the sun, but at a low temperature, if we can find a way to get that fusion process operating in a small reactor at room temperature. And this has been the goal. Everyone's familiar with Fleischmann and Pond's experiment at University of Utah, which we learned about in '89. They had been actually looking at a variety of processes at low temperatures. And the cold fusion experiment, as it was called back then, it's now called low energy nuclear reaction, LENR. That's how you'll see it referred to. At the time, it was called cold fusion. There were other researchers around the planet working on it. just around the same time that we've never heard about until recently, Dr. Takeaki Matsumoto in Japan, one of Ken Shoulder, Hal Puthoff's colleagues, Ken Shoulders, who also worked at SRI and had been involved with creating microelectronic masking technology for the NSA to create microelectronics decades ago. A number of people have been working on this, even going back to the 50s. There was a guy named Winston Bostick working for DOE to find peaceful uses of nuclear explosions, nuclear energy propulsion. A number of people have been working on this over the decades. We really haven't heard about it very much. And the idea is at a room temperature in, a tabletop type reactor device, can you create a loop of feedback so that the excess heat keeps the reaction going? And in essence, you've created a huge amount of energy output for a very limited input. And that has been the goal of this from the beginning, one aspect of this type of research.
Do you think it's going to happen? And why is it that like the U.S. Patent Office and the science community in general, based on, I love using the word dogma, because you repeat something enough, it becomes truth, that this is something that is impossible and goes against everything that we know in science. So therefore, if anybody achieves this, it's bullshit.
Well, first of all, as we've been talking about the previous hour here, science changes, new ideas come along. The idea of the structure of the atom changes from one decade to the next. There are Copenhagen meetings and debates. So sure, it might not have fit into the formal idea of how atomic structures, interact and so forth. But those ideas change over time. And based on all of the data we have, it's not only does it work, it's sustainable. And it can, many different experiments have reproduced these reactions, at least temporarily. Sometimes I think the longest one was Dr. Alexander Parkhomov in Russia. He was able to sustain this reaction for 225 days with his cold fusion reactor. And recently, Google attempted to reproduce it. Wouldn't that be great as a power source for all these AI servers and so forth? Consume a lot of electricity, is something right on site that could generate the electricity instead of, tapping into it at a nearby hydroelectric dam or something, or building a lot of new nuclear power plants. They weren't able to reproduce the Parkhomov 225-day reactor. And you can ask people who know about this. Someone in the comments mentioned Bob Greenyer at the MFMP YouTube channel. Anyone can listen to his presentations on MFMP to hear about the very fascinating history behind all of this. But they didn't reproduce it quite correctly. And I talked to someone at one of our science meetings, SSE, Society for Scientific Exploration, in San Francisco in 2015, Dr. Vittorio Violante. He gave us a whole presentation about exactly the question you're asking. And he said, we got the cold fusion reaction working. It's a resonance reaction. It's not a chemical reaction. It's a type of resonance between the atomic structures. And when they resonate in a certain way, it keeps amplifying itself. But he said it's very finicky. It can take a couple weeks to get the reaction going. And then you sustain it for a while, and sometimes it can abruptly stop. So it's a very sensitive reaction to sustain. But he did say they produced excess heat. He said there's no doubt in their minds of that Italian government agency, ENEA, the largest energy institute in Italy. He said they got it to work. It definitely worked. It's not a question of does it work. It's a question of how can you sustain it so it produces excess heat, energy, even electricity. So why haven't we seen it yet? My argument would be that there is so much money going into the hot fusion research that takes decades to complete that those people don't want it to work, because it would interfere at all these really large universities that we're familiar with. It would interfere with their funding process. It would basically make them obsolete. It's like my dad used to say, when the automobile was invented, the people that made horse and buggy whips went out of business. It was just reality. And we're talking about the people who make horse and buggy whips going out of business with an automobile. That's my feeling about it, because you look at the trail of papers and research, and our own DOE has been funding this type of research for decades. They even bought one of the best cold fusion companies in Ukraine a number of years ago called Proton 21 Labs. They brought them and got all the work, about 100 workers, to come over to the US, and they ended up at Oak Ridge in Tennessee, and the program is black now. They had done something like 8,000 successful cold fusion documented experiments, produced what they believed were mini black holes in the materials they were working with, excess heat, nucleonic transmutation. You can look at Adamenko and Vysotsky. But I think if you do your research, you'll find that there have been people successful at doing this, Jimmy. And it ends up being either bought out by the US government or something happens to it. So I think there are interests there that don't want it to work. That's what I think.
It's like a two-pronged problem that we have. If it exists in nature, the process is simple and we are making it complicated. Okay? Yes. That's it. If it exists in nature, then it's frigging basic. It's fundamental and it's basic and a very simple process. And we're screwing that up. The other part with this, with the hot fusion, I just explained, and I'm not playing around. Hot fusion, our version of fusion with our sun right now is operating at 10 million degrees. The hot fusion experiments that are happening on Earth right now in China and other places are trying to achieve levels of 100 million degrees. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. It's easy to get to 10 million degrees. Why aren't we just working with hydrogen and working with the same principles that our sun is working on right now? It seems that is achievable with our technology today. Why are we dicking around with 100 million degrees and achieving this hot fusion for, millions of a second? It doesn't make any sense. Why aren't we operating in, if we're going to deal with hot fusion, in the 10 million degree hydrogen gravity world?
No, it's a good question.
What I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense, does it?
Sometimes you get the feeling that they just want these projects to keep going. We've always been, ever since I was a kid in high school, reading Omni magazine. Remember that magazine?
Oh, love. Yeah.
We were always told that hot fusion powering our homes is only about 10 years away. This is in the 70s. So we should have seen it in the 1980s. We are anyone who listening to music, we're way past the 80s now. And
I thought we all were going to have fusion reactors this big.
Hello.
Yeah.
Little fusion reactors. I mean, I think it's doable, but Jimmy, what you're saying is correct. We should be doing it the way nature does it. And it does it at these low temperatures all around us all the time. And we see this in ball lightning, and cold fusion, according to people like Matsumoto, is just micro ball lightning. It's a type of resonance that ends up creating a sustained standing wave like cymatics, very similar to a cymatic pattern. And it regenerates itself sometimes for a couple days. Those little mini ball lightnings can just embed themselves in metal, feed off the electrons in the metal, and they're just waiting there. Ken Shoulders, by the way, said the same thing. They all thought that this was a very natural reaction. And I'll tell you the closest everyone comes to it every day. Those little static shocks you get from touching a pet or touching a doorknob, that is the beginning of a cold fusion reaction. It's not sustained. It just sort of discharged. But if you can generate that little charge and sustain it, that is, according to these researchers, that is the beginning of that resonant fusion reaction. It's called a charge cluster, and Shoulders called it an exotic vacuum object, the quantum vacuum, kind of exotic vacuum object, EVOs. And he said, if he saw them in his experiments, if you can sustain them, they can create this excess energy, electricity. And so here's where this goes into the supernatural and Bigfoot and cryptids. There is a dark version of all this, Jimmy.
Let's go.
It's called Black Evos, Black Ball Lightning. If you read Skinwalkers at the Pentagon by Jim Lukatsky, about Skinwalker Ranch and all of that, they encounter these dark shapes that seem darker than dark. Bigfoot, so many of these encounters, the people said it looked like they absorbed light. They were darker than
Vanta Black.
Vanta Black. So many of these paranormal phenomena mimic the dark side of cold fusion. I'm not saying dark side as negative. There's an inverse side about it that Matsumoto called mini black holes. Shoulder called it black evos. Black. They are a flip side of ball lightning, an invisible
the absence of light.
Exactly. They're absorbing energy. They're absorbing ambient energy and creating structure out of it. And so much of what we see around what we call the paranormal, including those smells of sulfur and other types of burning smells that people associate with cryptids, Bigfoot, ghosts, fire and brimstone, even going all the way back to the Bible, associating the demonic with this sort of sulfurous types of smells. That is also seen around cold fusion reactors. Those same smells are seen around cold fusion reactors. It's the natural course of events when you get fusion going to create carbon, iron, and sulfur. And these are some of the same elements that we see around what we call the paranormal. So it really seems that there's a connection there. It's really a connection, a natural type of cold fusion that's already happening, and that some, in my view, life forms have already picked up on this. They have surpassed our hot fusion reactors, Jimmy, and they're using this naturally like a power source to generate coherent energy to get humongous amounts of strength, cloaking, invisibility, teleportation, all these things that we associate with creepy crawlies and cryptids and Bigfoot, and all of this is all associated with ball lightning, micro ball lightning, coherent matter, and it's almost an irrefutable connection at this point for me.
We're going to continue this after the break, and it's a fascinating thought because you're with a group of friends, right? You're walking around. Somebody says, who farted? And somebody else is no, we're approaching a cold fusion reactor. Oh, but I'm going to be here all week, Simeon. I'm going to be here all week. Our guest tonight, Simeon Hein. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, we are talking about cold fusion. Is it explaining everything? All of that and much more after this short break. This is Fade to Black. Stay with us. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's Fade to Black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? How you doing? Jimmy Church here. Special announcement. Get your Fade to Black t-shirts. That's right. Help support the show. Help support everything that we do over here. We've got 2 t-shirts. We've got 2 ways to get them. Get your Fade to Black t-shirt today. Go Backley Tappy. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything is commercial free. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut. Today we're headed to Bolivia, Tiwanaku, Peru, and of course, Pumapunku. Brian, exciting. Thank you so much for everything, my friend.
Always an honor. Right behind us is the sacred river of the Inca that goes past Machu Picchu. So we're going to be driving up to its source at 15,000 feet above sea level and then down to Lake Titicaca.
So today we hit 15,000 feet.
Yes.
Crazy. And you can do it with us. All you have to do is go to hiddenincatours.com. Simple. We've got 2 tours coming up next year, one in June for the summer solstice, right? And then another one right here in November. So hiddenincatours.com. Come and hang out with Brian and I and his amazing team.
Right on.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein is with us, and we're talking about cold fusion and how it possibly could explain just about everything. Simeon, could cold fusion in nature open up portals in between dimensions, and would that explain a lot of things too as well?
Yeah, it points in that direction. I mean, even some of these researchers, like I've mentioned, Ken Shoulders and others, they talked about these charge clusters creating other realities within our reality that we see right here that is going to be invisible. And we're not talking about a parallel reality. This is not like a Hugh Everett thing, a multi-quantum state. We're talking about our reality here, but something within it that's hidden. He said one of the things not mentioned, and by the way, this is from his paper, Permittivity Transitions. Anyone can find this online now. Ken Shoulders, just look up his work. When I read this, it inspired the whole book, Dark Matter Monsters, just from this one sentence, okay? One of the things mentioned is the likelihood of forming totally black organizations with ghostly properties and being able to operate without our being able to see them in any presently available way. He's talking about charge clusters creating. We were having a discussion about the ghostliness of entanglement. He called it pseudo quantum entanglement. It's another variation on it. But he's the one that tells us that it's creating life forms in the spaces around us, right next to us. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but this is what the science suggests.
It's scary.
You won't be able to perceive them. They're there, but they're not coupled directly into our type of matter. Their permittivity is slightly different, the electrical constants. He talks about complex organisms emerging from black, invisible ball lightning, basically. And that is our link to all of these life forms, phenomena, cryptids, the abilities of Bigfoot and other types of creatures to seemingly vanish, as I've spoken to many witnesses who've described this to me, literally turn to these little sparkly lights and they're gone. Someone even a couple of weeks ago told me it looked like the predator effect in the tree. She and her husband went up, and this was in Idaho. They saw this outline. That was all that was left, is this shimmering outline pressed against the tree where this Bigfoot creature had been. I think, and I'm happy to be proven wrong by anyone who has another idea, but I think that's what Ken Shoulders is talking about. Complex organisms based on a type of inverse type of electronic coupling, creating invisible matter with superconducting, superfluid effects. And this is what we see with a lot of these phenomena, don't you think?
Do these dark clusters have thought? Do they think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, they're their own type of intelligence. It's just based on a type of conductivity, superconductivity, self-organization that is extremely fast by our standards. Shoulders called it electronic formations at electronic speeds. They're operating at electronic level, so they can change very quickly. They can generate gravitic effects. Their type of matter has a coherency that our matter doesn't. It's all different temperatures, different frequencies. We were talking about frequencies at the beginning of the show, the link to music. We're talking about complex structures that are coherent, where the particles are at the same frequencies and temperatures, and it gives them the ability to morph in ways that you and I don't quite know how to do yet.
Can we take this scary thought a step further? Do they have community? Do they have an existence? Is there a communal organized structure?
Well, I would imagine they do. Why wouldn't they? We see this on all types of organisms. Yeah, someone's mentioning plasmoids. Here's what we're talking about: plasma toroids, plasmoids. This is the phrase we mentioned. Winston Bostic in the 50s. He came up with that phrase, plasmoids, in the 50s. That's what we're talking about. Let me give a classical analogy to this that everyone will be familiar with: murmurations of birds. When you see a flock of birds, you often see this. It's very common in the Midwest. You've driven through there, Jimmy. See these huge flocks of dark birds, and they all turn at once like a wave, as if there's no leader or anything. No one knows quite how they do it. That's sort of what that's kind of an analogy of what we're talking about here, is particles that are so closely entangled, connected to it, that they form a type of coherent matter. A stage of matter past plasma is the most abundant form of matter in the universe. Plasmas, nebulas, and lightning and auroras. That's actually 99% of the universe. The visible universe is this plasma state, this electrically charged gas, ionizing gas. And we're all familiar with that from fluorescent light bulbs and so forth. But this is that type of energy organized like that flock of birds with a coherency to it. And when we throw in, Jimmy, that 90% of the matter in the universe is this dark matter, as physicists have been telling us for the past couple decades, we have dark energy and dark matter. We're outnumbered by this dark matter 5-1 in terms of weight. So for all of the matter we can visually see, there's 5 times as much matter that's around us that you can't see. So I would imagine that these communities outnumber us by 5-1, something like that. And we don't see them most of the time until they decide to pop into our existence, and all of a sudden they're there with their strange sort of properties, is a kind of enormous amounts of strength, ability to seemingly glide. One of the things I always wondered about, Jimmy, just as an aside, is you often hear reports of these flying cryptids floating without flapping their wings, as if they're almost using the same type of propulsion that bees do, or insects, the ability to kind of float without necessarily, something electromagnetic rather than physical motion. Yeah.
And Okay, this is my twisted mind, but I always go back to music. It's the only way I can like get everything correlated. But if we have, we're on a wave, right here, let me change camera. We're on a wave. They are on a wave that is on a different time scale than ours. But for a brief second, they cross. And for that brief time, that's when the frequencies match.
Yeah.
And that's when they are visible to us. And that's why they then appear and disappear.
Yeah. I think that's
am I using appear to appear and disappear correctly? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for a lot of us, it's very challenging to believe that there are life forms in your environment around you that you can't see. They are operating at another frequency and in this inverted way that Shoulders talks about, where they're absorbing more energy than they're giving out. Very much, you mentioned the word vortex in one of those little breaks during the break in one of your promos for something that you're doing, the vortex. This is what we're talking about, is vortex type energy, ether vortex type energy. The same way that tornadoes seem to have this incredible power that goes way beyond anything we understand from hydrodynamics or thermodynamics, the ability to pick up semi-trailers and to melt. Sometimes when they go by, things look like they've been melted. They don't look like they've just been blown apart. The like mailboxes will look like they're dripping like a Dali painting. That shows us there's something electromagnetic going on in that vortex type structure. And I would guess that these organisms, because the tornado and the whirlpool are the only structures in nature that we know that are like this, that seem to be reverse entropy. They're not losing energy. They seem to be pulling in energy. I really suspect that what we call cryptids are types of life forms that learned how to do this. Not like us, where we need to always keep taking in more energy, or we our energy level goes down, typical thermodynamics. They seem to know how to absorb energy from the environment, ambient energy. The way even people like scientists like Gerald Pollack in his Fourth State of Water book, the fourth state of water, he argues that water goes into this state where it's absorbing radiant energy from its environment. And that's what's driving things like tornadoes and structures like that. And he suggests, very much like what our conversation is going, the direction it's going in, that he believes there are life forms that can literally just live off of ambient environmental radiant energy. Because water's ability to absorb the energy. Yeah.
You know what it tells me? I remember, you'll know the physicist, but there was a physicist in like 1870 said, 1870, there's nothing left to learn. Right. That's it. We've learned everything that we need, and that's it. There's nothing left. And here we are in 2025, and I think we don't know shit.
Right.
The more that we move along, the more questions that we have. We know actually very, very little. And I don't think I'm wrong.
No, you are not wrong at all, Jimmy. These institutions never want to present themselves as not being experts. We're all familiar with this every time we go to professionals or experts. They're not putting people down that provide professional services to us, but they want to present themselves as the expert, right? Or you probably wouldn't be their customer. But science is like this too. It has to present this fake facade of knowing everything, while underneath the reality is much more like what you just said. We don't really know what's going on. We may know 5% of it. And it's somehow these institutions around us lost their humility, if they ever had it to begin with. And they want to present it to the public as if, oh, we know how fusion really works. This cold fusion, it's junk science. It's, pathological science, these crazy terms they invent for this stuff that nature is already doing everywhere. You mentioned seeing that B-21 bomber you saw at contact in the desert flying around in that area.
No, it might. No, here I live.
Here. Okay.
I live next to Skunk Works.
Oh, okay? So you're Palmdale. Got it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
get it. Yeah. So, there is this feeling that one of those bombers, which one was it, had the electrostatically charged.
B2. Yeah,
The B2.
B2.
I saw some of those go by coming back from a conference in Laughlin. Remember the Laughlin UFO conferences a number of years ago. Driving back with Area 51 right to my left, going up that highway in Nevada, going north. And this pair of B2 bombers came right over, not too high up. And I started thinking about what I had heard at the conference, which is the idea that they were using electrostatic charges as a type of way of reducing air drag and so forth. So some of these ideas already seem to be employed. Unfortunately, they end up in special access programs, and the public doesn't realize how fascinating science really is and what's actually being used in technology. So it's already there, but the publicly facing organizations that we see, the publicly facing side of NASA, for example, they're very hesitant to talk about any of this, even though they know damn well that this is happening from all the sensors they have in their satellites and sensing systems. So I would say, yeah, the science, we really don't know very much, but that's very encouraging because that means there's a lot more we're going to be learning about all this. And with all the challenges that our planet's facing right now, it means maybe some of the solutions aren't as far away, as we think. It's just these institutions are very reluctant they become very ossified. They just become set in their ways, and we all know how they work, and they don't adjust. I mean, I'm just down the road from the University of Colorado, where my apartment is here in Boulder. I look up at that building where the Condon report was written, in that physics and engineering building. I said, how could they have said those things when the Condon report came out in the late 60s, that there was no military significance to all of this, while our ICBM facilities are being shut down at Maelstrom and Minot and all those different northern tier SAC bases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the objects would come over, and I've heard Robert Salas and others talk about this, and just whole flights of missiles, which seemed impossible to these missile launch control officers. They all just would go down simultaneously, all 10 of them. Like, it's unbelievable, since they're all on separate systems. How could you have written a report at that time period and said, oh, there's nothing to see here? And then we later find out they had reached that conclusion before they even started the study, which is why some people on the Condon report quit. And so I know this university, I'm just giving an example, this university that's right next to me here, just a mile away, they completely did a whitewash of the UFO-UAP issue when they knew that this was affecting national security, very serious intrusions into nuclear weapon missile storage facilities and launch facilities. And yet they're saying, well, we don't see any significance to the topic. End of story. And we don't hear about it again for, a couple decades until that 2017 New York Times article.
Every time I'm in Boulder every month, right? Working.
Right. Got it.
And it gets under my skin every time I drive through there and I think about that. I do the same thing that you do. It just that whole situation still affects me. I just get angry about it. And the result that came off of that, a bunch of paid, you know what I mean? I'm going to say influencers, right?
A lot of money went into that. It was a couple $100,000. That's a lot of money in the late 60s.
A lot of money, and everybody's opinions were bought and paid for, and changed the course of history. Right there. Let me ask you this. I kind of want to stay on the dark side of this.
Yeah, sure.
And dark used two ways. One, the absence of light. That's why it's called dark matter and dark energy. But dark also because of the implications that are there. Experimentation is important, and conducting experiments. CERN is blasting stuff together at the speed of light just to see what happens. Okay, I like that approach. You don't know unless you try it, right? but are they opening up portals to allow dark stuff to come through into this world, both accidentally and possibly with intention? Is that a way to experiment?
It's a good question. It's like that Stephen King novel, The Mist, right? Where it became a movie, and there's some military experiment, and these creatures come through from the other side, and they're, not friendly. To put it mildly. Yeah, it's a good question, but I can say from the research we know that those smaller type of black holes and dark matter objects, they're more ephemeral than the really large ones we see out in the cosmos. Those black holes we see out in the cosmos are really huge, and they last a long time. They keep going. The ones that could pop into our reality are more like the things that, again, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov studied, Soviet Union, Russia, of these micro black holes that he felt were coming into the atmosphere occasionally. He gave several examples from his country's history of people experiencing sudden anti-gravitic effects and people's like gravity getting canceled for a few seconds in certain areas in the Soviet Union, where people floated off the ground, hit the ceiling, everything's off the ground temporarily. People saw these objects coming in, stripping off nails off of roofs as they came along, and so forth. But they don't last that long. The smaller the black hole is, actually, the more powerful it is. Again, we know this from the research of Dr. Takeaki Matsumoto. He had what he believed were micro black holes. I mean, this is a book that you can get, by the way, on Amazon, produced by the MFMP and Bob Greenyer. He called these mini black holes. I'm not certain if these literally are mini black holes, but they could be. He believed this is the source of cold fusion and ball lightning. And to support his research, and I put a video about this on my YouTube channel just about a week ago, there was an article in New Scientist magazine arguing, Jimmy, that black holes are not always round. They can form threads, almost along the lines of the string theory you were mentioning before. They
Right.
can look like strings and threads. There was a Russian researcher, B.U. Rodionov, who also made the same argument, is that we've misconceived of some of these processes. We think of them as just being balls, but they can form threads and strings of that type of gravitic collapse you would associate around a black hole. So they may be around us more than we would think, but they tend to be more ephemeral, and they're sort of limited by their own event horizon, which would be pretty small. So I don't think, to answer your question in my long-winded way, I don't think it'd be something to worry about. I mean, I could be wrong about this, but from my research, they sort of don't eat, they're not the black hole that swallowed the Earth, even if CERN is producing a little bit of this.
Do you think that there are, okay, I have interviewed, I'm going to interview him again, a physicist at CERN, from CERN. Okay. All right. From a boardroom at CERN. Really, nice guy. But he said something to me that I always found a little strange. His comment was innocent on the surface, but I asked him about this subject. And this was his answer, Simeon. He goes, "Hey, man, we hear the same stuff that you do." I said, "Okay, all right." He goes, "Yeah. And I'm still looking for the secret Illuminati door here to the room. I haven't found it yet." Okay, now, funny joke, ha ha. And I'm thinking to myself, what if, you know what I mean? What if there's actually something to that? And it sounds like, if you want to deflect off of something, then joke about it to get away from the truth. You know what I mean? And I'm not that much of a conspiracy theorist, but it was just a weird joke, right? It was just like a weird, and I laughed, but I guess the question ultimately should have been back to him, and I'm going to ask you now. is everybody at CERN on the good side of the fence, right? Or is there some bad actors over there too as well that want to check out the crazy part of physics?
I would imagine if you asked the people working there, since I kind of read their publications and articles through different science magazines, they would probably feel that they're doing good, honest research for all of us. It's the people that are funding all of this. Are they sharing all of the results with the public? Is it transparent? That is what we ran into with all of this classified UFO research. I mean, I've spoken to people who've been involved in looking at these crash materials, and none of them want to come forward with their name yet. They will tell me what it's like to look at those materials, and it moves in this direction of what you're talking about. These materials have exotic properties, even to the point that these people have told me they felt like it was self-aware material, even though they didn't know what that literally, it's a strange thing to say. It's the feeling they got from being around it, that it was engineered at such a nanoscale, atomic level construction, that it got to this threshold of the Planck constant, this tiny unit of measurement, the length of time it takes light to cross an atom, the diameter of an atom, that time, the Planck constant, the basis of physics, that everything resolves to this Planck constant, that this material was almost conscious, like us, which is strange to think of inert materials being like that. So I imagine if CERN had come across anything like that, I don't think they would be talking about it. Just because their mandate is to do this publicly funded science and to kind of smash particles together. And, if you can get the energies high enough, maybe they can find a new particle or something and advance the standard model. So that, like a lot of this, Jimmy, I think when these discoveries are made, the rest of us don't hear about it because it's just not part of the agenda of that publicly funded project, even if such things are actually discovered. I can't believe it's just Matsumoto and Ken Shoulders and a few people here and there in the cold fusion community who've discovered this. I think it's probably been discovered over and over again. And the people that discovered it sort of want to keep the benefits for themselves without really sharing it. Or maybe it's the key to a lot of other things that they feel. Well, you've heard about these national security orders where the government can come to your lab or your research facility and confiscate your equipment and slap you with a silence order where you can't even say that you were visited in the interest of national security if they feel that you've gotten to the point where you've discovered something that could, affect national security. You've heard,
of course.
Yeah, you've heard about these things.
Yeah, and that has to be in place.
Yeah.
I'm not. It's weird. I don't want to go against the grain of the way our community thinks, and the man and everything else. I totally get that, but I need to feel comfortable that at least some of this stuff is under control.
Yes. Yes.
You don't want it. You don't want some mad scientist, Dr. Doom guy running around with no, you don't. No, I want to feel like James Woods is going to step in and go, nope, that's it. And Black Hawk helicopters and come in and take over somebody's lab if it needs to happen. And I'm okay with that, Simeon. I really am. That's the only way I can sleep at night. I'll give you an example. All right. Crazy example. Forbidden Planet. All right. 1955. That movie came out. All right. 1955. Great movie. But that's the crazy part about that movie was they were fighting a monster created from consciousness. Right? Your biggest fear, your craziest thought is manifested into reality and you can't defeat it. Now, we are on the cusp of that type. That's exactly where you are at in this conversation right now today, with cold fusion and all of this. Well, I don't need Dr. Doom in control of that technology.
Right. It's definitely a balancing act. There's, it's like a coin with two sides. The other side is that we're on a planet that has a lot of environmental challenges. And if we had cleaner technologies that didn't pollute, didn't involve tearing up huge amounts of the planet for resources, for energy, I think we'd all agree it's a cleaner, better way
Exactly.
to create abundance. So we need to have that without the potential, destructive effects of dark matter monsters and black holes coming through the portal. It is something that we will get control over, Jimmy, over time, because we're all very curious people. We always want to learn more. The show is just a perfect example proving that point. And to master this science and technology in a way that's natural. And we're so familiar with these really large scale projects we've been talking about, CERN, that we don't even realize we're looking at this same sort of energy when we see a bumblebee flying through the air, collecting pollen from a flower, that it's most likely that life forms we're familiar with, I would argue, are already using some of these principles for anti-gravitics and energy, that some of this is already being tapped into because the energy is there and it's advantageous. Hummingbirds, another example. You look how they fly. You wonder how they can fly those huge distances, or if they aren't using something like the B-2 bomber, some sort of little static they're generating from the speed at which they flap to generate a little extra lift. I mean, when I look at hummingbirds, that's what I'm thinking. There was a Russian scientist named Grebennikov who believed that the tiny, fine fractal structures of insects, the little tiny hairs on their wings, provided a type of anti-gravitic effect, an electrostatic effect that gave them
when I
levitation.
watch, I've got hummingbird feeders on the front and back of my house, and it is fascinating to me. I can sit there for hours and just watch hummingbirds. I watch them fight. And by the way, they are territorial gangsters. They are not cute little, oh no, man. I watch them. But anyway, there's this one that sits up in the corner of my yard and watches the feeder. Okay. And when somebody comes in I'm assuming, anyway, that boom, and she's like a bullet out of that tree, instant velocity in a straight line to the feeder, and then stops on a dime, right? And that's not flapping. There's something else that's going on there. I don't know what it is.
I think it's this Grebennikov effect. I mean, again, it could be something else, and I'm always happy to be wrong. As long as someone comes up.
How do they stop and start while they are in the air?
I think they're getting close to Ken Shoulder's exotic vacuum objects, where is he describing these little electronic organisms that are slightly decoupled from our reality. They're in the same space, but they are not coupled to our physical space the same way. They certainly look that way when you look at hummingbirds. Conventional scientists would say, no, it's just the way they use sugar and they have these special muscles in their wings. But I think it's more than that. I think it's their Grebennikov direction or something like that. That's my belief about why nature's already tapping into cold fusion, Leonard. I think these organisms are already doing it. They don't need government grants. In fact, Jimmy, they don't even need to mentally understand how it works. They just know that at that very small scale, there's extra amounts of energy available, electromagnetic energy. And they're using it in some way, which is why they seem a little strange. But their personalities, as you mentioned, are very interesting. I'm always amazed how they will guard a feeder and they'll let certain hummingbirds in, and the others.
Ones in.
What is the What is it?
It's
They're just letting their
gangsta.
girlfriends in or
Yeah,
something,
yeah,
and the
it's
other
gangsta. They are so
It's
gangsta.
nature's yeah, definitely
Yeah,
gangsta.
it's
Yeah.
just so gangsta. And I never knew that about hummingbirds until you sit and watch the community and how they operate. Because sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 of them sitting on the feeder and everything seems to be cool until the gangsta comes in.
Yeah.
And it's like, really, it's man, you've got to, I don't know the sense of community. How do they know? And they obviously do. They know who is who, right? They know friend or foe. They know all of this. And I've got 2 feeders in my backyard and 1 in the front. And to watch the competition between the 2 feeders is one. To watch what's happening, they'll come out of the trees, chase them away. While they've chased the hummingbirds away, the other ones come in while that, and then he comes back or she. It's just like, and it's just it's fascinating. Now, staying on the subject, going back to dark energy, the idea that we're just now, as a matter of fact, it's starting to reverse itself, these theories, but dark energy pushing the universe apart in all directions, faster than the speed of light, and it is increasing in speed. Okay, so that has been pretty fundamental since Edwin Hubble, 1922 through 1928, when he first started proposing this. How does that energy last infinitely? Why doesn't that energy weaken? How does that energy consistently get stronger without absorbing other energy around it? It doesn't make any sense. And it goes way past entropy in the second law of thermodynamics if it just continues forever.
Yeah, that one is challenging to understand. What you're saying is that everything is sort of moving apart from everything else. And it's something I don't like to think about too much, because if you read these books about it, what they tell us is in that several 100 million years, you won't even see stars in the sky anymore.
That's right.
That's a little, can you imagine looking out and it's totally black because everything is, they're still there, but the light can't, it's too far there. It's faster than the light's going to get to us. Eventually the light won't reach us anymore. And we'll just be us. Well, of course, you pointed out this exploding solar scenario in the beginning. So maybe we won't even be around for that. But no, it's definitely one of the, no, we're not sure exactly what, talking about dark matter for a second, we don't know what the particle is, what is dark matter. 1 or 2% of it seems to be this cosmic background neutrino field. These so-called relic neutrinos, which I want to point out are coherent. They were all created at the same moment in the universe, and they're at the same frequency, and they can be a source of quantum entanglement because they're all over the place, but they're exactly they're attuned to each other. They're resonant. We already have that's just one source we know of resonant communication in the universe are these relic neutrinos. Again, Dr. Alexander Parkhomov in his book, Space Earth Human, talks about this extent, his relic neutrino tests to prove that there was this something coming in at different times of year that were affecting biology and chemical experiments and so forth. It was a seasonal effect, which suggested it had to do with where the Earth was in position to the Milky Way, some sort of cosmic effect. Anyway, something that most of us are not familiar with. That is definitely one component of dark matter, a tiny component, 1 to 2%. But here's the thing, even 1 to 2% dark matter is still more than all the solid matter, regular visible baryonic matter, as it's called, that we can see. It's a lot. So there's the dark matter side, then the dark energy, endless debate, Jimmy, over what is the source of this energy that apparently is pushing galaxies apart from each other in all directions, as if
increasing in speed.
It's the space. The space itself is expanding. The space is expanding. It's not that the galaxies are moving. the space they're in is moving and expanding and growing. It's a little challenging to wrap your mind around. But
I mean, so where I get, and I study this, man, this is a deep part of my research and my time, but I get to the point where all this talk about 0 point energy and singularity and find, well, if you want some example of that, I would say the ideas behind dark energy are exactly that. Entropy, and our sun is in a little state of stability right now. Okay. So it's like in a happy entropic state, right? It's going to eventually, entropy is going to take over, but it's stable. One thing that has been pretty stable for the last 13.8 billion years is the expansion of space. Entropy hasn't taken over. The energy is consistent and it's increasing. That doesn't make any sense to me. It just doesn't. And I try to understand it where I go, oh, okay. But no, it doesn't make any sense. So why can't we figure that out and tap into that energy source?
That is the basis for the cold fusion Leonard process. Is its natural type of self-organizing resonance. And there are different ways to get it. You can create these experiments by putting deuterium, heavy hydrogen into these palladium rods. You can do it through sound, Jimmy, cavitation. There are people like Mark Leclerc that created the same effect, including the micro ball lightning and everything, just from cavitation, just from sound, which generates these little bubbles in water that then collapse at these really fast speeds and seem to create a type of quantum shock and transmutation of elements. There's a number of routes to create this natural self-organization. But there's one more component of it, Jimmy, we have to talk about. Sound. There is coherent sound. It's a natural outcome of this acoustic cavitation, articles written about the coherent generation of sound. There's a relationship between plasmas and sound and something called ionic acoustic waves, that plasmas, even out there in the universe, create sounds. If you can do it in a way like we're talking about where it becomes coherent, you would create a sound wave that would be the equivalent of a laser for light. And the connection here, I think, is something that many people have experienced around Bigfoot, which is what they say is this. It was the loudest sound I ever heard in my life. It was louder than a freight train. It was louder than being in front of speakers at a Black Sabbath concert. It made my organs vibrate. That's how loud it was. And yet someone 100 feet away from them in the campsite didn't hear a thing. That's like a sound laser.
Yeah, directional
sound. It's not something most of us are familiar with, but it's one implication of all this. But I would argue people already have experienced this in their reports of these tremendous Bigfoot howl, growl, screams that other people don't hear, that should have heard it if it's as loud as these people said it was. It should have been heard all over the campsite. And yet it's more like something that's directed at them, that they're experiencing in their body, that is not omnidirectional. And so it seems more like a laser. And that gets us back in this whole direction of coherent matter, directional energy, and so forth, and resonance. This is the outcome of it. So that's why I think you see evidence already in the so-called paranormal world of this type of energy process going on. Again, it's natural, it's self-organizing. It seems to be the way that matter wants to interact, is to create a type of resonance and energy exchange. So now, again, it's not the exception, it's the norm. It's the norm.
Can it only happen in an atmosphere? It can't happen in a vacuum.
It can happen. Yeah, it could happen at a quantum level in a vacuum type state, and I would be in an experiment, not something you and I would experience, like the Bose-Einstein condensate. This is something that Bose wrote to Einstein in the 1920s, that I think your theories of relativity predict a type of matter where it's just a wave. It's like a coherent wave that's so slowed down, it's like one big particle. And they created this here. If you visit Boulder, it was created over at NIST, the NIST labs at the University of Colorado in, I think, 96. I mean, it wasn't seen until it was predicted by Bose and Einstein in the 1920s, but they didn't see it for 70 years. It only takes place. And in a coffee shop here, I ran into someone who was a world expert on the Bose-Einstein condensate. And he had come in from CERN, by the way, to help show them how to make it permanent and not just pulsed. But it's a wave. It's a wave of energy instead of a wave of matter at ultra cold temperatures. And that's an example of coherent matter, but only in a lab, in a very isolated setting at near absolute zero. We're talking about the same process of coherency where all the particles are entangled together and act like one particle. When they all act like one particle, you get this phase conjugation where it keeps amplifying instead of having the waves and troughs be kind of at different places. Kind of like when you and I play music and it's sort of doing its own thing and you get harmonies and dissonance. This is where it all overlaps until you get something that's really focused and really powerful, like a laser. So yeah, it wouldn't be in a vacuum in the way you and I experience it in real life. But I think that's what people are experiencing when they see something cloak and teleport, or have this very loud directed sound, but someone next to them doesn't see it. It's a type of. Let me give you another example of this around cryptids and Bigfoot. You talk to people that have been around them, and they say they experienced this sudden terror around the Bigfoot creature, or it could be Dogman or other types of cryptids. But they say it turns on and off like a switch. And one woman I know who I've talked to extensively, she's a fan of your show, Julie, said that when she experienced this in Indiana as a kid, it felt like it was projected like a frequency onto her. She knew it wasn't coming from inside, but it was this incredible sense of terror. But then it just switched off like a light switch. Again, it's the same type of directional, coherent energy. I would argue completely natural. As we've been talking throughout the show tonight, you can try to recreate this in CERN labs and very expensive experiments, but I think nature is already doing it. And these creatures that we call Bigfoot and cryptids and so forth, it seems that they already somehow harnessed this thousands of years ago. We're like the dummies here. I mean, we have modern technology and science, but they just sort of naturally picked up. I don't know. Is it through their hair? Is it because they have so much fine hair that as they walk, they're building up a static charge clusters just from moving around? Or is it from sound that they make that type of coherent energy? That's along the lines I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, we talk about it today. I'm just talking about our community or science fiction or whatever. Like this is some new phenomenon. Ancient cultures have been talking about this shit for 5,000 years. This is nothing new. I don't want to say what I showed you earlier. I don't want to bring that up, but I showed you something that is 6,000 years old.
Yes.
Right? That is an example of an understanding of this subject, and it's represented in that object. This is nothing new, is it? It's
right.
Just, now, let me ask you this. Let's close out. Let's close out the conversation with this. A few months ago, lying in bed in the dark, I had this thought pop in my head, and I don't think I'm wrong, but let me hit you with this. Entanglement is not restricted to particles that are entangling themselves, or we are entangling. That every particle in the universe is entangled. Everything. I don't want to see it become unentangled, that's a bad situation. But I think I think every particle in the universe is an entangled pair. What do you think about that?
No, it's an intriguing idea. There's sort of an overarching organization to the whole thing.
Everything
Is
partially.
entangled with something.
Everything is entangled. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's another way to look at it. It's another way to look at it.
I'm not a physicist. I'm not a PhD. I'm not any of that. I'm not even going to crack the joke I play when on TV. I'm not even going to do that. But it just, if we want to get, using that, my favorite word, fundamental, right? Let's get basic. Let's just get down to the bottom line of everything. That answers, for me, that checks so many boxes. Channeling, communication, telepathy, dreams, parallel worlds, of course, quantum computers, and it's not about one of my particles in my brain entangled with a particle in your brain. Everything is entangled. And that just answers a lot of questions for me. I think it's too heavy for science to even consider, but I don't know, man. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, if we're all entangled like this, what we should all be doing right now is envisioning a more peaceful world. I'm not using that piece.
Yeah, right. Let's do something.
How about a productive, peaceful, cool place where there are music concerts all the time and the tickets are affordable like they were when I saw Zeppelin in 1977. I think I paid $30 for those green tickets in Madison Square Garden, and I did the computation and it would not come to like $250 nowadays, that $30. So yeah, I think we can do a lot more than I'm encouraged by all this, Jimmy. That's what I'm going to say. All my experience from remote viewing to crop circles to resonance to these is there is an overarching set of principles here. If we can tap into it, it comes down to resonance. That's what entanglement is. If we can tap into resonance and learn how to play with it and work with it, we can create the abundance that we all desire and need to survive in a healthy way. I think it's there. It's just somehow we've been led to think that it's all this linear mechanistic processes, which is only just a limited amount of how the whole thing works. It's this other layer of resonance that is over everything that I think we're going to see more and more of it. And I would say that people are going to see more of it in their lives in different ways. And you affect it from your own resonance, your own intention, your own thoughts, and so forth. It's an interactive type of field. And that's, I think, where we're going with all this. I'm really convinced that's where we're going with all this. I think we're going this direction because I don't think in the 30 years, Jimmy, that I've studied this topic, I would have seen this type of unification that we talked about tonight. I never imagined it would unify over the very types of things we were talking about tonight, coherency, dark matter, things like this. The fact that it's come together around these principles, whether it's energy or these exotic life forms, these cryptids, telepathy, and so forth. The fact that we can talk about those around a couple central principles shows me there's where we're going is a really cool place. I think we're going to a really cool place together. That's what I think.
Where can everybody check out your latest work?
You can go to my blog, newcrystalmind.com. It's a blog I've had for a couple decades now, and that links to all my books, Black Swan Ghosts, Dark Matter Monsters, my YouTube channel. I like to put up YouTube videos here and there just about the stuff we're talking about. So you can find me on YouTube, New Crystal Mind. You can just put my name into Amazon to see any of these books and so forth. So,
yeah, thank you so much, man. And always
Thanks,
great. Man. Always a great conversation. And I look forward to our next one, man. Cool. Thank you so much. I'll be in Boulder. I don't know, maybe in about a week.
Well, shoot me an email or something. Maybe we can.
Yeah. I'll be so I'll reach out to you. I'll be there next week. Okay, so I'll hit you up and we'll go break some bread.
Sure. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for participating.
I'll talk to you, Dr. Simeon Hein. Everybody, his links are below. Go and check out his stuff, and there you go. What am I doing tomorrow night? Does anybody know? What why do I do this at the end of every show? I never have my stuff up in front of me. Hugh Newman here tomorrow night. Simeon Hein tonight. Hugh Newman tomorrow. Somebody pinch me. Trey Hudson on Wednesday and Dale Graff on Thursday. An amazing week coming up on Fade to Black. Thank you, Simeon. Perfect show tonight. And so let's just wrap it with all I've got is Go Backley Tappy. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Backley Tappy.